Rodafleming here, still in sunny Philippines. It's not very sunny today. We had a typhoon, you know, that big typhoon that went through it. By God, yesterday the rain was just unbelievable. But it seems to have blown through. It's okay. It's got that kind of freshly rinsed sky to it now. And it's evening, it's coming up for 5 o'clock, so the light will fail very, very quickly. I've been involved in a number of conversations recently about HSTS and the question of why more of them, particularly outside the USA and the UK, don't take up GRS. Now, figures on this are pretty slim, hard to find. Even inside the USA, you know, where there's theoretically it's better kept, but even there they think the figures I've seen suggest that only about 25% of HSTS actually choose to have GRS. And I was asked, why is that? Why don't girls go the whole way? And the answer is they don't need to. You know, that's the basic, simple answer. Naturally, it's more complicated than that. But at root, the bottom line is they just don't need it. If you go back to Harry Benjamin's scale that he made up in the 60s, which in many ways was very accurate, but it had the cardinal error of conflating AGP and HSTS, which in many ways rendered his the resulting scale kind of invalid because there's no similarity between these two. However, he was aware that there was two classes of what he called transsexuals: those who did want GRS, Genital Reconstruction Surgery, or gender reassignment surgery, whichever you prefer, and those who just didn't. They wanted everything else, but they didn't need that. And the fact is that the group that want everything else but they don't need that is by far the larger group. And the question was asked, why was this? Now, I think that there are two primary reasons for this. And for one of them, you need to kind of look at Freud. And Freud he has his stages of development, you know. And the first three stages are the oral, the anal, and what he called the phallic. Now, then there's a null phase, and then finally you get the genital phase, which is essentially equivalent to Tanner stage 4. It's it's the men arch in females and what's called the sperm arch in males. Okay. Now, what happens is that this is on right at the moment when identity is beginning to be formed. Okay. And the developing child becomes aware of, if we're talking about a male here, of his penis. It would be opposite for a female, obviously. So he becomes aware of the penis. And it's like, oh, this thing is there. And they don't get sexual pleasure from them at that time, but they do get physical pleasure from them. I mean, if you've got kids, you know, if I have kids, I can well remember this face, and they constantly got their hands down the front of their pants, and you know, it's just what they do, you know. There's no point in making a fuss about it. It's just they grow through it. But what's actually happening is they're actually identifying themselves. They're beginning to establish their identity. And the identity exists around this organ. And for boys, this is very important. It's also important for girls, but for boys, it's important because they fear that they might lose them. Girls, I don't think, have that fear. And so they have this thing called castration anxiety, which we'll go into a bit later. But for the moment, just look at this. The idea is that you get this sense of who you are from the presence of this organ that gives you pleasure. Okay? Now, for a sexual invert, remember, now sexual inverts, these are the people who have had, for various reasons, imbalances in hormone delivery in the womb. Their sexuality is not matched to their sex. For a male child, this male child has a male body, but he has female sexuality. Okay? So he's kind of a little bit confused, but he still has the penis. And the penis is still identified, it's still contributing to his identity. It's still who he is, but he considers himself to be a she. So the penis is a girl penis for this person. So it's part of her, not part of him. Are you following this? I mean, just please forget what the brain-dead literalists and essentialists Americans tell you, because they don't know what they're talking about. Freud had it right. So what's happening here is that they have identified their penises as an essential part of themselves. Okay? Even though they see themselves as girls. Okay? So it's a girl penis. It's my penis. It's obviously a girl penis. Okay? So what happens is, as they grow up, that remains the case. So that means that the existence of that organ is extremely tightly tied in to their own sense of identity, even though that sense of identity identifies them as girls. Okay? So that's one really important issue. That's one thing that you really have to understand when you're looking at this, that why so many don't have GRS. It's like, well, why would I cut off such an essential part of myself? And that's by the way, one reason why I'm always a little bit dubious about GRS, because I don't like to see people being coerced into it, because they may not understand how much of a change that would be. Anyway, we'll leave that to one side. The other reason that so many HSTS don't desire GRS is that they already get the affirmation they need. Now, affirmation is absolutely crucial to the life of any trans woman or any trans man. And for HSTS, they principally get this through sex. And I've discussed this before. And for an HSTS, that will be through being penetrated, right? So actually her penis is not involved. She won't penetrate. A nuclear transsexual, there's no way she's going to use that, to stick in someone else. She just ain't going to do it. But she gets tremendous affirmation and physical pleasure from being penetrated. By the way, there is this incredible myth goes around the internet that suggests that the receptive partner in these sexual relationships, do not enjoy what they're doing. Well, I can tell you it's complete nonsense. I get this shown to me pretty much on a daily basis. These girls have absolutely shattering orgasms, shattering. And they are not faking it. Don't tell me they're not getting pleasure from this at all. That's just nonsense. The idea that it's just something they do for the partners, I think that comes from either the gay man and his, the new gay man and his egalitarian stuff, or it's just a thing that straight guys can't understand. The recipient partner, the person with the female sexuality, in this case the feminine gender, they really like being penetrated. That's a big deal for them, So, but the thing is that they learn to do that using the back entry. And if you've done that, it's like, why would I want to change that? The girl is obviously an attractive girl. She's able to attract straight men. They're happy to penetrate her using the organs she's got. She's getting enormous amounts of pleasure just from doing that, and she's getting affirmation. And now you come along and you say, well, you should really have that cut off and have this operation. And she'll go, screw you, why would I bother? I don't know a single trans woman here, HSTS, who would not rather, I'll give me a boob job, yeah, I'll go for that. But they're just not interested in the bottom surgery at all. It's like, no, why would I bother? I already get what I want. Now, it's true, there is an issue, because this kind of sex requires that the passive or the recipient partner is completely open to what's going on. They have to completely submit. They have to absolutely surrender, because if they resist at all, their muscles will tense up, and then it's going to hurt like the absolute devil, And so that's going to make things terrible. I mean, if it hurts once, it's going to hurt a lot more the next time because they'll be frightened. And so they have to have this ability to completely overcome that. And there are some, we don't know how many, but there are some trans women, HSTS trans women, who just can't do it. I mean, I've met girls like that, and they say, it's really difficult for me because it just hurts so much. And my experience has been that in these cases, if you're really, really, really gentle and do it exactly the way that she needs it to be done, then you can work around it, you can get there. But for some girls, it's just not possible. They can't do it. They will never be able to completely relax themselves enough to actually take pleasure in what they're doing. I mean, they might be able to accommodate it, but they're not getting the pleasure that someone who can do it really does get. And so for these people, GRS becomes really a valid option. I mean, why not? They're going to have a completely functioning vagina. Okay, it's not hooked up to a reproductive system, but in terms of pleasure, it's there. It's going to give them the pleasure they need. And for them, this becomes a viable and a reasonable thing to do. But actually, you're talking about a very small set of people here. Most HSTS transsexuals really don't need it. They're quite happy as long as they don't masculinize. And that's really the big issue. And historically, for thousands of years, The cure to that has been removal of the testes. Doing, doing. That's it. You have no more testosterone. You stay a girl. And this is still widely practiced across Southeast Asia. A lot of girls, they might maybe been on conventional medicaments for a period of time. Sometimes they're on, birth control pills. It's not really advised, although a lot of girls really like it. They like the way that it makes them feel. Or they've been, actually, wealthier girls from middle-class families maybe have been prescribed a more considered regime, let's put it that way. They're getting blood tests and stuff like that. And so their testosterone levels have been kept right down. But they come to a point where they go, well, I'm concerned about my health. I'm concerned about continuing this, and maybe been doing it for 10 years or more. And they go, well, okay, I know what I am. I'm not going to ever go back. I'm going to be this way. This is me for the rest of my life. And at that point, either GRS or very commonly, it's very common here, what's called an orchiectomy or sometimes an orchidectomy, which is a bilateral removal of both testes. It's a very simple operation. It takes like half an hour. And I believe these days it's done under a local. It's just not an invasive surgery at all. It's actually not more, I am told, it's not much more of an issue than having a vasectomy, quite honestly. Although the testes are obviously actually removed, rather than just being, separated from the feed line being cut. So that's something that they can do that doesn't involve major surgery, and yet maintains their femininity. That's really important to them. I mean, these girls are already having sex that satisfies them with men who really like them, using the other entry. So why bother? And like I say, that particular approach of used to be called castration, but these days we call it orchiectomy. It's been going on for thousands of years. We know because we have we not only have the historical records, we've actually got the surgical instruments that were used to do this. So we know what was going on. We know that this was a normal practice. It's mentioned in so many texts. By the way, just as an aside, when you read in the old text about this and that eunuch and this and that eunuch, I mean, there's just a general assumption that a eunuch is a great big huge massive black Nubian slave with no testes, and yes, it did happen. The castration was carried out to try and tame violent and hard to control slaves, but most castrations were actually carried out to make trans women, essentially. That's why they did it, because they didn't have testosterone blockers. So it was like age of 12, here we go, doing, and that's it. You'll never be a man. And that was carried out across the world. Rome, Persia, India, China, everywhere. I mean, the Americas, everywhere. When you're considering this, one of the things I think is really important is that society should not be placing on trans women, HSDS or AGPs, this idea that they have to have GRS. We went through this row 15 years ago, when many countries in Europe said, well, no, you couldn't change your sex legally until you had the operation. And basically people said, well, that's completely outrageous, because you're saying that people have to have major invasive surgery just in order to make a simple legal change. And most countries at that point, particularly after an ECHR judgment, which I think was in 2001 or 2, they brought their laws into line such that you don't need it. You do not need to have your equipment removed in order to legally be a female in these countries, and the UK is one of these. So I don't think we should be tolerating any attempt to move back to that situation wherein people are being told, oh no, you can't have that. You can't be a woman unless you get rid of the diddly bits. It's just not on. We've had that argument. It's gone. It's been debated. We decided 15 years ago that's not how it's going to be. You can legally be a woman as a male who retains a full working set of male genitalia. You can. That's the legal situation. And I think that it's you're talking about a tiny number of people here, by the way, just so you know. But you can't go back to a situation which was thrown out for its very unfairness nearly 20 years ago. Can't do that. So we have to be very vigilant, because it's clear that the gender crits are mounting I think they were asleep when all this happened in the first place, and now they're trying to mount a campaign, egged on by some particularly nasty, unpleasant women, TERFs, like Posey Parker's a very good example, and these are really poisonous people who are absolutely, they don't care how much damage they do to people. They don't care. They are picking on a tiny number of people in order to, I don't know, create a row where none really exists. So that is and it was in the context of this that the question was originally asked, by the way. So that's the answer to that question. The reason that so many HSTS trans women don't have surgery is, first of all, the penis is actually part of their identity. And they identify it as a girl penis because they're girls. And that's that, it's not going to change. And secondly, they're already having the affirmative sex they need using the organs they've got. So what's the problem? They're getting an enormous amount of pleasure from how they're doing it as it is. They don't really need to change. And it's only a small number of people who, in amongst HSTS, it's a bit different for AGPs because they're a lot more concerned about the way things look. For HSTS, there is definitely a small number who actually do need to have the GRS, but they are relatively speaking, a minority. And my argument is, yes, they absolutely need to get the support they should, but the rest of them shouldn't be, they shouldn't be corralled or pushed into having these surgeries when, frankly, they don't need them. You go around here and there are trans women all over the place, and some of them are absolutely gorgeous. You have no idea. They're just stunning. Sam's not bad, and they're just beautiful girls, and they're intact. They don't use the bits, but they're still there. Anyway, that's enough of that. Take care, as always. Bye-bye, bye-bye.